got to vote, because if you lose, it sends a really bad message. It just sends a bad, and they will build it up. Here's the story. If you win, they're going to make it like ho-hum. And if you lose, they're going to say Trump suffered the greatest defeat in the history of the world. This was the greatest. You can't let that happen to me.
All politics is Trump. Welcome back to Harvard. That was President Trump just last night rallying his base in Lexington, Kentucky, ahead of that state's gubernatorial election today, and making the case that all politics is Trump. The president won Kentucky in 2016 by nearly 30 points, but polls show a much closer race for governor tonight. Mississippi's also holding a competitive governor's race tonight, and in Virginia, control of the state legislature. The entire legislature is up for grabs. Polls have already closed in Kentucky and Virginia as we speak. Both parties are watching these races for any early indicators heading into 2020. Joining me now with what we know is MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve,
Chris,
teach us.
We have got a real race here in Kentucky. You mentioned Trump won this state by 30 points. What you're seeing right now, half the vote or so is in. Matt Bevin, the incumbent Republican, you see a 5-point lead here statewide right now. We expect this to end up a lot closer than that. Let me tell you why. First of all, that lead, just in your introduction there, that lead shrunk significantly. Why? This is one of the reasons. Largest county in the state, Jefferson County. This is where the city of Louisville is. A bunch of votes just came in there. You can see this is Democratic country. There aren't too many Democratic counties in Kentucky. This is the mother of them all. Andy Beshear, he's leading it by 17,000 votes right now over Matt Bevin in Jefferson County. But look at this number right here. Only 21% of the precincts in the largest county in the state are reporting. Already, you can see Beshear has a plurality of 17,000, so he is going to add a lot to that in Jefferson County before the night's over. That is also the story here in Fayette County. This is where Lexington, the University of Kentucky, this is also a Democratic county. And you see, again, very early, only 5% of the vote is counted here. And already you see Beshear is out to more than a 1,500 vote advantage over Matt Bevin. So he's going to add a lot there, too. And so with the two large ones still to, I'm just looking to see if it changed again. It's 32,000 right now. We expect that's going to shrink. One of the stories, the reasons why this is so close, besides the suspense there in Louisville and Lexington, it's the story we have been telling the last couple years, why Democrats have been making gains in some places in the Trump era, the suburbs, suburban areas. And let me point to one particular part of the state right here. See these three counties? This is sort of the Cincinnati metro area up here. These are large, densely populated, almost 10% of the voting population, almost 10% in the state is going to come from these three counties. These are typically Republican counties, suburban, Republican, pocketbook issues, that sort of thing. Let me show you what's happening there tonight. You do see red in this one, Boone County. Bevin wins it with 56, but the last time Bevin ran for governor 4 years ago, he got 66% here. So his support came down 10 points in a sort of a core Republican county. How about next door? Kenton County right now, 87% is in. The last time Matt Bevin ran, he got 57% of the vote here. He's down to 47. He's down 10 points. Similar story. We can go next door. Campbell County, 75% is in. Bevin got 54% here last time, all the way down to 42%. So you have pretty significant movement in some pretty big suburbs here away from Bevin toward Beshear. The story that I'm seeing tonight, rural strength for Bevin being offset by suburban strength up there for Beshear, and the Beshear campaign hopes, and let's just see if there's an update, hopes for some monster numbers out of Louisville, I got to say it that way, excuse me, Louisville and Lexington.
What about Trump's impact last night? Any way to determine the last-minute switchers, the last-minute deciders?
Well, I mean, again, I say there is rural strength that you can find in here. Just to give you an example, there is some rural strength here. You'll see from Matt Bevin, just in the coal country here. This is traditionally Democratic country. This is, see if I can get it. Here's Harlan County. Bevin here got 69%. 100% is in Harlan County. Bevin got 69%. 4 years ago when he ran for governor, his number here was 62%. So he's got gains in some of those.
Let me ask you about this. Big national question. I get a sense, watching Trump's numbers nationally, that he probably lost some women in the suburbs over the last 3 years. But I get the sense, since the numbers are holding, he must have been picking up white guys and very conservative women in the rural areas. Is he picking up certain places, not just losing? I get the sense it's bouncing out.
This is the story we're seeing here in Kentucky tonight in these results. Harlan County, for instance, and I can find some other rural counties here. there is more strength for Bevin now than there was a couple years ago, and he's getting closer to that Trump level. But you say balanced out, those suburbs, Republicans depend on those suburbs.
Okay. I think this is going to be a close election. I'm sure you agree. Next year looks very close for this president. Thank you for this. You are the best, Steve Kornacki. You are. I do not say anything but the truth here, and that is the greatest truth. You're the best.
It's really nice of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Kornacki. Up next, a look back at 20 years of hardball college tours. What do you see? This is when the young people get involved, which we always try to do here. Get them involved. You're watching hardball.
While I'm asleep also.
What are you dreaming of, the White House?
That was my college tour with Al Gore at Lehman College back in 2002. College tours have been a feature on hardball since the show first aired on MSNBC back in '99. Let's take a look. Welcome. We're at a Memorial Auditorium here at Stanford University from George Mason University in Virginia. Live from Chapman University in Southern California. Live from the University at Albany. Live from the Citadel. From Fordham University in the Bronx, New York. Live from the University of Denver. The University of Notre Dame. From Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. Senator John McCain. Let's play hardball. Arnold Schwarzenegger. John Kerry. Robert De Niro. Matt Damon. Robin Williams. The George Sound Band. Joe Biden of Delaware. Live from Westchester University outside Philadelphia, the Hardball College Tour with our special guest, Senator Barack Obama. Let's go hardball. I promised you the President of the United States, and he's here. Let's play hardball. Town Hall tonight for a full hour. Our guest is the front runner for the Republican presidential nomination, Donald Trump. I think he wished he didn't go through that door. Anyway, be sure to follow Hardball on Twitter and enter to win exclusive Hardball prizes. And that's Hardball for now. I love the glory years. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Matter show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
You're hiding your guests like under people's seats?
I am hiding. We are hiding the ball. It is called a tease, and I'm speaking to the master in all of cable news of the deep tease.
Okay,
I learned it from watching you.
The only reason I deep tease things is because I run out of time and then say, okay, that's next. It's almost never intentional.
No, you are Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel with teases. So I'm just trying to work on my own.
I'm going to break into your office and figure out who your guests are, just so I know, because I can't handle the suspense. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated.
Results, especially the big results in Kentucky, where, according to the Republican Party, their view of the case in Kentucky, the socialists won tonight. Listen to this. This is one of the ads, an excerpt of one of the ads they were running right down to the end. Socialists in Washington want to impeach Trump and take us backward. Andy Beshear is part of the radical resistance. And yet somehow, Andy Beshear won.
Yeah, in a state that Trump won by 30 points. Wacky, right?
Yeah, and Donald Trump went down there and put it on the line and told them last night, you know, this will be bad for me if I lose. He once again did that Trump thing of personalizing that race to be about him, and if he wants to make it about him, it's a very bad night for him.
That's right, and if you're going to plate your trough that way, you're going to have to pay for it later on. Exactly.
Yeah, and now what we're now seeing, what's going to be fascinating to see what's the Republican spin after this. We know what the Republican spin was going to be, which is Donald Trump went down there and saved the day. So So what is it now? What do they say tomorrow? What is Mitch McConnell thinking tonight? Mitch McConnell's numbers in Kentucky, his popularity is not good, to put it mildly. Mitch McConnell's up for re-election next year. What does this mean for him?
I was talking to Yvonne Hilliard, who was down at Andy Bashir headquarters earlier this hour, actually, as we were just getting in the NBC News call about Bashir being the apparent winner. And what Vaughn was saying at the time that call came in was that Mitch McConnell's numbers look basically exactly like Matt Bevin's numbers in Kentucky. And this is the last statewide race that's going to happen there before Mitch McConnell is up statewide to try to hold on to his Senate seat. And so, you know, every race is different, and that'll be a presidential election year, and there'll be a lot going on. But it can't look good. I imagine that the Republicans will try to make this a personal loss for Matt Bevin that doesn't say anything about anybody else.
Rachel, the winner has taken the stage in Kentucky. We're going to Bashir headquarters right now in Louisville.
Let me first start by thanking my running mate, Jacqueline Coleman. You are an incredible friend, an amazing running mate, and I know you're going to be a phenomenal lieutenant governor. Tonight, voters in Kentucky sent a message loud and clear for everyone to hear. It's a message that says our elections don't have to be about right versus left. They are still about right versus wrong. That our values and how we treat each other is still more important than our party. That what unites us as Kentuckians is still stronger than any national divisions. And tonight, I think we showed this country that in Kentucky, we can disagree with each other while still respecting one another. In this Commonwealth, a Commonwealth that I love, we believe in lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. And here in Kentucky, we can still fight from the very top levels of government for every family, including the lost, the lonely, and the left behind. I haven't had an opportunity yet to speak to Governor Bevin, but my expectation is that he will honor the election that was held tonight, that he will help us make this transition. And I tell you what, we will be ready for that first day in office, and I look forward to it. Let me say that while this was a very hard-fought election, I know elections are difficult on families. So let's all wish this governor and his family the very best. We can do that. I stand here tonight grateful to the Commonwealth of Kentucky and its voters, grateful. But I gotta start by thanking the people in my life who truly drive me, my family, for their love and inspiration. I want to thank my wife, Brittany, your next First Lady. And let me tell you, I know another First Lady pretty well. And I believe Brittany is going to be one of the best that we have ever had. How about the best? Yeah. And I have to thank my two kids, Will and Lila. You all are my reason for living. Everything I do, I think about you. I love you all so much. I need to thank a couple parents who raised me. I want to thank my mom and dad, Jane and Steve Bashir, for their love and support, their service, their amazing service they gave to this Commonwealth. Tonight, I want to say thank you to our union families that helped make this election happen. I want to thank the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police. I want to thank our educators. Thank you. To our educators, your courage to stand up and fight against all the bullying and name-calling helped galvanize our entire state. I'll never forget the first couple years that I was in office as your Attorney General were a little bit hard. There were days that I came to work and I felt like that last soldier of Rome. But I put on that armor and I stepped up to the front line each and every day until 12,000 reinforcements came to the Capitol. To our educators, I know so many of you worked hard on this campaign, and I appreciate every single hour that each of you and that all of our nearly 3,000 volunteers spent knocking on doors. And while I believe that Jacqueline said it, let me be very clear. To our educators, this is your victory. From now on, the doors of your state capitol will always be open. We will treat each other with dignity and respect, and we will honor our commitments to our public servants. We will make sure that promises made are promises kept, and we will work day and night to do as much good as we can, however we can. So while I want everybody to have a lot of fun tonight, after tonight, this election is over. After tonight, we move forward with every other Kentucky citizen as Team Kentucky. Team Kentucky is a team whose mission is rooted in our shared values of faith, hard work, and a belief in a bigger, brighter tomorrow. These Kentucky values transcend any and all party lines. I am committed to be a governor for everyone. That means rural and urban Kentucky, eastern, western, northern, and central Kentucky. It means being a governor for every Democrat, every Republican, and every independent, every single Kentuckian. To those watching, if I did not earn your vote today, rest assured, I will work hard to earn your trust. And even more importantly, I will always strive to do the right thing. Because I didn't run for this office just to be governor. I ran for this office because I want to govern well. We are facing big challenges, but I know that we are up to them. I ran on kitchen table issues, and I will govern focused on those same challenges of good jobs, health care for every Kentuckian, protecting and funding our pensions, and always supporting public education. I believe that we have a brighter tomorrow to make Kentucky the agri-tech leader of this country. We're going to build our advanced manufacturing sector and invest in workforce training. That's how we're going to create good jobs all over Kentucky in every single community. In my first week in office, I'm going to rescind this governor's Medicaid waiver. We're going to give this state a brand new Board of Education. And we are going to restore the voting rights of more than 140,000 citizens. Every day, we're going to work to expand access to health care, and we are going to fight to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Health care is a basic human right, and my administration will treat it as such. Under our administration, a pension is a promise. There will be no more going after the pensions of our teachers, social workers, and first responders. They have earned that retirement. And public education will be the central priority of my administration. We are going to invest in our public schools because we believe in the next generation of Kentuckians. Our schools are the foundation of our communities. Every kid has the right to get a world-class education that opens up every door that they can walk through. And we can only provide those opportunities by ensuring...
We have much more election news tonight, including in the state of Virginia. But let's go straight to Steve Kornacki for the latest on Kentucky. Steve, NBC is calling Andy Beshear the apparent winner. What are we waiting for confirmation there?
Yeah, so basically you can see the margin here. It is inside of 1% here. This is 0.4%. The margin here, 5,801 votes. Every precinct, we have every precinct in the state accounted for. What is happening now is Matt Bevin, the governor, has just, there it is. We just had I want to figure out what just happened there. I think I may know. It was this. This is where we had a discrepancy, and I wasn't sure on this. This is Woodford County, right outside of Lexington. Our numbers were lagging behind the Associated Press as we were trying to figure out. This was the one discrepancy that was on the board. What it basically did, I apologize, Lawrence, this literally happened as we were right here, but it basically, it updated by a few thousand votes the totals for Bevin and for Beshear, but you can see it still lands at about 5,000, I'm doing the quick math, 5,126 votes, 51-26. That's what it lands at right here. Matt Bevin, the governor, has said he's not conceding this election. What he does right now is he has the right, if he wants, he didn't say necessarily he's doing this, he has the right to file for a recount. There's no automatic recount provision in Kentucky, but what he would have to do if he wants to take that route is he'd have to go to court. He'd have to go to a judge. Apparently, in his speech tonight, he alluded to discrepancies, not clear exactly what he might be referring to, irregularities, excuse me, but he would have to put that in writing. He'd have to go to a judge. He'd have to get a judge to say, okay, there's going to be a recount. But there's a possibility he's going to seek that. There's a possibility the judge is going to give him that.
And, Steve, but in terms of vote count tonight, what more are we going to see?
In Kentucky, that's it. I think what you just saw there in Woodford County was the last one. It was a thing where the Associated Press is doing a running count of this, and we've been doing a running count. We were trying to reconcile it. That's the little change there you just saw. But otherwise, as I said, every precinct in this state is accounted for. So if Bevin is ultimately going to become the winner of this race, he would have to get a recount, and the recount would have to turn up something that we are not seeing in these results. There's not going to be any more precincts that come in Kentucky tonight that would put Bevin ahead.
Steve, put this Democratic gain just in the vote count in Kentucky in perspective. Donald Trump won the state by 30 points. Here you see a Democratic candidate statewide running for governor the day after Donald Trump went down there and said this election is about impeachment, actually tried to put impeachment on the ballot in Kentucky. And for the Democrat to even make the race this close, we would be talking about it, even if the Democrat was coming in second.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that happen. I think when you're a Democrat and you win a governor's race in Kentucky, a lot of things have to go right for you. There are two things I draw your attention to. One I've been talking about tonight. It's in the suburbs. It's Cincinnati. This is the northern part of Kentucky here. On the other side of the Ohio River there is Cincinnati. These are suburbs of Cincinnati, these three counties that kind of jut out here. Population-wise, these are pretty big counties. They make up about 10% of the state population. They are traditionally Republican bastions. Traditionally, Republican candidates get pretty big pluralities out of here, help them win statewide. That is not what happened tonight. You see, two of these three counties in the Cincinnati suburbs actually flipped and went Democratic, went for Beshear. And in the third, that's Boone County, the red one right here, Bevin ran 10 points off what he did the last time around. These are counties Trump did well in 2016, but tonight they went far towards the Democrats, away from Republicans. I think that is part, Lawrence, of the national story we've been talking about. Suburbs across the country. That's where you've seen the most dramatic movement in the last couple of years during the Trump presidency, away from the Republican Party of Donald Trump and toward the Democratic Party. That was part of the story in Kentucky tonight. The other part of the story in Kentucky tonight, coal country, rural Kentucky, eastern Kentucky in particular here. Kentucky is an interesting state because we say, yeah, Trump state, red state, wasn't always a red state. Way back, Kentucky was a deeply blue state, a Democratic state. It was blue-collar, culturally conservative, but it was Democratic. And what happens here is in eastern Kentucky, you start to see these blue counties here. Check this out. This is a good example. Bath County, small county here, but Beshear wins it 52-46. How big of a departure from 2016 is that? Look at this. Donald Trump got 67% here in 2016. He won by 37. Tonight, Bevin lost this county by 6. You see this throughout here. Trump won by 22. Beshear won by 19. You can go up, see, Nicholas County. Here's another one. Trump won by 41 points in 2016. Bevin couldn't even carry it tonight. So it's an interesting phenomenon here where you have, you'd call it ancestrally Democratic. These are folks who live, it's rural. They were born Democrats. They've kept their Democratic registration in a lot of cases, but they've started voting for Republicans at the national level. They certainly voted for Donald Trump. Boy, did they go back to Beshear and the Democrats tonight. Vaughn Hilliard, our reporter down there, was saying one of the theories that's out there is one of the reasons you heard Andy Beshear mention this in his speech, his father, Steve Beshear, the former governor, he did very well in these areas, and it might have been in part the Beshear family name might have reassured some of these voters and brought them back into the Democratic fold. But you had, look, Trump last night giving that speech Trump coming to Kentucky, these are exactly the kind of places he thought he was going to fire up and he was going to get behind Bevin to carry him over the top. Bevin needed to do better in coal country.
Steve, thank you very much. You've queued up Von Hilliard for us perfectly. We're going to go live now to NBC News' Von Hilliard at Bashir headquarters in Louisville. Von, what's the reaction there?
Yeah, Steve said it. Throughout the night, all of a sudden, as these numbers were coming in, they were slowly coming in there. I was talking with Steve, and the campaign was saying Eastern Iowa may be saving us right now. These were largely small counties, so incremental numbers. But when you're looking over at places like where Trump won by 40%, but also those little counties there like Perry and Johnson, where if you look at the 2015 numbers to the 2019 numbers, Bevin lost maybe just 4 percentage points. But what that said about that was the fact that essentially those areas did not turn out in as high in numbers. The voter turnout increase did not surge in the same way that it did over in places like those northern Kentucky suburbs, over in Boone, over in Kenton, where they saw voter turnout increases of 150%. You know, and you look at those counties, essentially they went from Matt Bevin victories in 2015 with about a 66% number down to about 55% number. And so when you see the matter of closing those margins, that's where this campaign had the opportunity, and through the Louisville area, through the Lexington number, to have those sort of dramatic surges that ultimately were able to make up for what were still victories in some of those more rural counties. You know, we were talking about what this campaign was, and when we came to town, you know, you turn on the television set and you see Matt Bevin ads, and what were they about? They were about Donald Trump, Lawrence. They were about impeachment. They were about the closeness of the relationship between the White House and Matt Bevin. It was not so much about policy as opposed to Andy Bashir. Andy Bashir was focusing on issues like jobs and healthcare and education. And when you looked at this, I showed up at the polling site this morning with Matt Bevin, the Republican, and I asked him, why did you go the route of nationalizing this campaign so much? And he said, look around. He said, people are talking about Trump. People are talking about impeachment. People are looking at somebody that needs to defend the president. I countered him saying, you're not running for the House of Representatives or the Senate, with all due respect, sir. He said, essentially his answer was, well, you know what? Trump works. There was no discussion of policy. And ultimately what you see here was a Donald Trump victory in 2016 by 30% to an Andy Bashir victory tonight. And just a few moments ago, on this very stage, Bashir said what this victory meant was showing that Kentuckians chose right versus wrong over left versus right. And he said from this stage that he plans to expand voting rights. 140,000 Kentuckians. He plans to implement a new Board of Education, and he plans to roll back those Medicaid waivers, essentially placing work restrictions, work requirements on Medicaid recipients in the state of Kentucky. Lawrence.
Von Hilliard, thank you very much for joining us from Louisville. It's time for our panel to consider what's happened here tonight. We're joined by Sam Stein. He's the politics editor for the Daily Beast. Steve McMahon, Democratic strategist and co-founder and CEO of Purple Strategies. Neera Tanden's with us. She's a former senior advisor to President Obama and Hillary Clinton. She's the president of and CEO of the Center for American Progress. And let's just take a look. Let's just take a look at what Donald Trump had to say last night. Donald Trump last night in Kentucky, setting the stakes for voters in Kentucky.
You got to vote, because if you lose, it sends a really bad message. It just sends a bad, and they will build it up. Here's the story. If you win, they're going to make it like,
Steve, Donald Trump says he suffered the greatest defeat in the history of the world.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, if I were Mitch McConnell tonight, I'd be a little concerned. If you look at what Donald Trump did in 2016, winning by 30, you look at what happened tonight, you look at your opponent, Amy McGrath, having outraised you in the third quarter, 10.7 million to about 7 million. And you look at your numbers and how you're underwater, and they really look like Matt Bevin's numbers. I think Mitch McConnell's not having a very good night tonight. Donald Trump certainly isn't having a good night tonight. And if I were a Republican senator running for re-election, I'd be real worried about these numbers.
And Neera Tanden, if you're Mitch McConnell and you're thinking, well, you know, no matter how close it gets, on that final night before the election, I can have Donald Trump fly into Kentucky and save me. Didn't work this time.
Yeah, not saving last night or today. I think the most important part of tonight is Republican senators considering impeachment have had a strategy, and that strategy is our success depends on Donald Trump. And what they see in one of the reddest states in the country, a state Trump won by 30 points, he has no coattails for Republicans. He has no coattails for Bevins, who really it wasn't just neutral. Bevin tied himself to Donald Trump. And so Bob Costa had some reporting on this earlier. I think they're really looking, Robert Costa, really looking at this in terms of how do they separate themselves. I mean, I think you might see more Republicans potentially think of how do I get away from Trump instead of how do I basically cover for him each and every day. And I think that could prove really important over the next few weeks with the impeachment. Yeah,
Robert Costa of the Washington Post reporting tonight that he spent a lot of today with Republican senators and that they were all watching this election in Kentucky tonight very, very closely, taking that into consideration on how they approach impeachment. I want to show the way the Republicans believed they could win this race in Kentucky. Let's take a look at this ad where the Republicans basically were telling Kentucky voters that only the Republicans could save them from the socialists. Let's watch this.
President Trump and Governor Bevin are making Kentucky great again. But socialists in Washington want to impeach Trump and take us backward. Andy Beshear is part of their radical resistance. Liberal Andy Beshear doesn't share our Kentucky values. Send the socialists a message. Defeat Andy Beshear.
Sam Stein, they sent the socialists the message tonight.
Yeah, they elected him. That ad might have been a little bit over the top, I think, maybe not believable. But I think it gets at something bigger, which is Republicans, and they probably still do, believe that they can do what they did roughly with Brett Kavanaugh in the lead up to the 2018 election, which is nationalize a culturally hotbed issue, turn impeachment into a political positive for them. And I think if there is a takeaway from here, and I'm not sure I think we can extrapolate too far, but I do think if there is a takeaway, it's that impeachment is not necessarily the great mobilizer that Republicans were hoping for among their voters. Certainly, it didn't seem to work in Bevin's favor, even though he tried to weaponize it against Beshear here. Now, of course, we need to keep in mind, Republicans won the Attorney General race. They won the Secretary of State race in Kentucky. So, some of this has to do with the fact that Bevin was a historically hated governor who did really unpopular things, including messing with people's health care. And Beshear was able to use that against him. But I think if you are to nationalize it, you have to point out that he did try to bring Trump in to boost turnout. It didn't work. And he did try to weaponize impeachment against Democrats, and that too didn't work. And that might have a psychic effect on other Republicans nationally and those running in close contests, where they no longer feel like impeachment can be the tool that they use to save their political hide.
Steve, let me just add something to what Sam is saying, which campaign pros know. They brought Donald Trump in to try to pump up Republican turnout. But what campaign professionals know is there's always a danger that what that kind of speaker does is pump up the opposition's turnout. I mean, I knew senators who used to say to other senators, I'll come to your state or stay away from your state, whichever will help you the most. And for liberal Northeastern senators, their deal was, don't worry, I'll stay away from your state because I know an association with me is not helpful to you. Donald Trump went there, and maybe he did pump up turnout on the Democratic side.
I'm actually guessing he did. I mean, one of the reasons that those senators would say that, I'll come in and denounce you or support you depending upon what's most helpful, is because they would look at polling numbers and they would understand if you have a 41% favorable rating in a state, you don't want that person in campaigning for you because 59% of the people don't like that person. And Donald Trump's numbers, even though he won Kentucky by 30, his numbers in Kentucky are not that strong. Mitch McConnell's, as we mentioned earlier, are not that strong. So you bring in a guy to pump you up, he may actually be pulling you down. And he certainly has the potential to turn out votes for Democrats. And you can see in those suburban counties where nominally Republican voters that would support a Republican candidate didn't support Matt Bevin tonight. And that's a warning shot for any Republican. And I think Neera's right. Every Republican in the Senate who's a jury member on this impeachment, if it gets to the Senate, is looking at this saying, it might not be as clear or as easy as it looked a week ago, and I might not want to go there.
We have to squeeze in a break here. Sam Stein, Neera Tanden, Steve McMahon, thanks for starting us off. We have much more ahead, including big Democratic win in Virginia. That one's really important. Stay with us. The Republicans put Donald Trump on the ballot today in Kentucky, and the Republicans lost.
Let's get out and vote. Let's send a message to Washington, to the other states, to the United States of America that Kentucky is leading the way and that we support the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
That was Matt Bevin campaigning for his reelection as governor in Kentucky just last night. That strategy did not work. We're joined now by Kentucky Democratic Party Chairman Ben Self. Mr. Self, was this a referendum on Donald Trump?
I think that Governor Bevin clearly tried to make it a referendum on Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, Kentuckians took a look at the two candidates, our Attorney General Andy Beshear and Governor Matt Bevin, and decided which one of them was better for Kentucky. And that's when Democrats win in Kentucky, is when you're voting based on what's better for everyday Kentuckians. And it's not a referendum on the national level. Clearly, they pulled out all the stops to try to save the second least popular governor in America. They flew in Donald Trump on the night before the election. Mike Pence was campaigning the weekend before. Donald Trump Jr. came in. Trump came in for two other fundraisers. Even had Ben Carson up in northern Kentucky. So they tried, when you have a candidate like Matt Bevin, who is so unpopular and whose policies have just failed the state for so long, you do whatever you can do to try to win, and that's clearly what they thought they had to do. When you saw the President of the United States coming into your state the night before the election, there's two ways to look at that. One, you could be worried that he's going to help the Republican, but you could also expect that this President of the United States would help energize turnout on the Democratic side. Is that possibly what happened with the President's visit? I think that's absolutely possible. I mean, if you look at Fayette County, which is where he showed up in Lexington, the margins from this race versus those in 2015 were not even comparable. I think it was over 3 times, the vote difference was 3 times greater than it was in 2015. So you absolutely saw Democrats fired up in Kentucky. And, as a campaigner, the other thing I saw 15,000 people who sat there all day trying to get a view of the president, while we had tens of thousands of people out there knocking on doors trying to convince people to go out and vote. And that's really what makes a difference in an election, particularly in a state like Kentucky, when you can talk to voters door to door and you have the ability to hire folks all around the state to organize volunteers to campaign for you. That matters a lot more than sitting in a rally for 30 minutes.
Your state's senior senator, Mitch McConnell, has pretty negative polling numbers in Kentucky right now with the election a year away. What does tonight's result tell you about the McConnell re-election campaign?
I think it absolutely shows you that Mitch McConnell is vulnerable. The Republicans are going to try to say that he's a different candidate, it'll be a national election, it won't be a state election. But when you look at the popularity numbers for approval ratings for Matt Bevin and Mitch McConnell, they're pretty darn close. And we've been seeing it for years already. People are fired up to take on Mitch McConnell. We hear from people all around the country every day, and people from inside the state, that they're ready to ditch Moscow Mitch and replace him with somebody who really represents the issues in Kentucky. Mitch McConnell stopped representing Kentucky years ago. He's all about accumulating power for himself. And I think when we have a Democratic candidate who's willing to put Kentucky first, we're going to see that Kentuckians come out and vote for them.
Ben Self, Kentucky's Democratic Party chairman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all for having me.
And when we come back after this break, tonight's warning for Mitch McConnell, you just heard it. It is not looking good for Mitch McConnell in his reelection campaign. And one thing we can guarantee you, Donald Trump will not be campaigning for Mitch McConnell the night before the election in Kentucky. If the Republicans have to be campaigning in Kentucky on the night before the presidential election, Donald Trump doesn't have a chance. It was an historic night in Virginia tonight where Democrats have won control of the State House and the State Senate for the first time in the 21st century. Let's go to Steve Kornacki for a look at what's happening in Virginia tonight. Steve.
Yes, Lawrence. So let's take you through the math on this in terms of the House of Delegates coming into tonight. This is what the balance of power looked like in Virginia. Republicans controlled it. It was 51 to 48. There was a vacant seat there. It was a Democratic seat. So it was essentially 51-49 coming into tonight. There are still a few races being tabulated, but right now Democrats have picked up, according to the Associated Press, they have netted 5 seats so far, a net gain of 5 seats on the House side for Democrats. Again, that's why the AP is now calling this control of the House of Delegates flipping in Virginia from Republicans to the Democrats. And then the state Senate side coming into tonight, it was, again, there was a vacancy here. So really it was a Republican seat. It was 21-19 Republicans on the state Senate side coming into tonight. Democrats really needed 1, because if you get to a 20-20 tie and you control the lieutenant governorship, as Democrats do in Virginia, the lieutenant governor can break the tie. So Democrats needed a net gain of 1 coming into tonight. Right now, the AP is saying they have got a net gain of 2 on the Senate side. So again, the Senate called, the House of Delegates called. That adds up to control of the legislature and control of the governorship for Democrats in Virginia. And really, it just completes a pretty remarkable transformation, I think, of the state of Virginia, of the politics of the state of Virginia. Lawrence, certainly you know as well as anybody, going back decades, Virginia was thought of as a Republican bastion. These are Republican presidential winning margins in Virginia starting in 1968, and you just see an ocean of red here. It flipped in 2008 to Barack Obama, stayed with Obama in 2012, was right on sort of the national average there. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won it again. I think folks look at 2020 and they say the Democrats heavily favored to win Virginia in 2020. Whoever it is, Democrats control the governorship, Democrats control the legislature. You're not really looking at a swing state anymore, Lawrence. You're looking at a blue state.
Yeah, and that is what Professor Larry Sabato said tonight in a tweet, and we're going to go to him now. Steve, we will be back to you. We're joined now by Larry Sabato. He's the director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. And Larry, a closer look now at what's happened in Virginia. What is the meaning of this election for Virginia going forward? Does this put Democrats in control of the next redistricting in Virginia after the next census?
Yes, they're in charge now. They have a comfortable margin in the House of Delegates. Their margin in the Senate may actually go up. There are 3 very close races. 2 look likely to me anyway to go to Republicans, but 1 may well go to Democrats. So that's a cushion in the state Senate. And of course, the governor doesn't leave office until 2022. Or January 2022, and the redistricting will be done in 2021. So this is a tremendous gain for Democrats. And as Steve was saying, it's hard to believe that the Democrats control everything in Virginia, absolutely everything, from a majority of the House of Representatives delegation, both Senate seats, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and now both houses of the state legislature.
And one of the elements of the degree of difficulty tonight is that the Democrats were running in districts that were actually drawn by Republicans during the last redistricting. And so they were drawn to heavily favor Republicans, which they did. And so this took everything the Democrats had to pull this off.
That's absolutely true. They did get a break in the summer when the courts ordered a redrawing of a few districts in the House of Delegates, and it favored Democrats substantially. So they got a break there. They actually might have won the House of Delegates even without those breaks. But in the future, given the fact that Democrats will redraw the lines in 2021, I think you can look to the Democratic margin increasing.
And Larry, a quick word about what we're seeing in Kentucky tonight. President went down there last night. He nationalized the race. He put himself on the ballot in Kentucky. He put impeachment on the ballot in Kentucky. The Republican advertising and campaign put Donald Trump and put impeachment on the ballot in the Kentucky governor's race. And it was a very bad night for the Republicans.
It sure was. Yeah, it's true they won everything below governor, but governor matters more than all the other things put together. And Trump put his reputation on the line. He picked Kentucky for the election eve visit because he thought he could have the most influence there. But Matt Bevin lost. And when you're a Republican running statewide in Kentucky, you have to try to lose. And Bevin tried for 4 years, and he succeeded.
Larry Sabato, thank you very much for joining us from Virginia tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And when we come back, we will have more on the big Democratic wins tonight. Stay with us. So how are Senate Republicans facing an impeachment trial? How are they feeling tonight? Washington Post reporter Robert Costa tweeted tonight, "I spent the day in the Senate talking with Republicans. They are all paying close attention to the Kentucky gubernatorial race. They are not just watching the returns, but President Trump's political capital as they make decisions about how to handle impeachment and their own future." Joining our discussion now, David Frum, senior editor for The Atlantic, and Jonathan Allen, national political reporter for NBC News Digital. And David Frum, Republican senators contemplating their own political future is what they apparently do all day, which up to now has had them pretty much in lockstep with Donald Trump. What is tonight's lesson in Kentucky for Republican senators?
It's a very ominous lesson for Republicans, and not just about President Trump. President Trump is an unpopular president, but he's heading an unpopular agenda. Why was Matt Bevin such an unpopular governor? Yes, he picked fights about teacher pensions, and yes, he got on the wrong side of a battle about casino gambling, but the number one, taken 1.3 million people off Medicaid. If Kentucky didn't like it, I don't think the rest of the country is going to like it either.
Jonathan Allen, did Donald Trump put himself on the ballot in Kentucky? The Republican Party put Donald Trump on the ballot in Kentucky. They put impeachment on the ballot in Kentucky because they believed it would help turn out the pro-Trump, anti-impeachment vote. Didn't work.
It was a poor bet, Lawrence, as it appears by a few tenths of a percentage point there. This is not evidence that Donald Trump wanted. It's not evidence that Senate Republicans wanted, that this impeachment process that's going on in the House of Representatives is going to punish Democrats. And what we've seen so far is zero evidence of that. The House voted last week on this impeachment process, and all but two of the House Democrats basically said they don't fear the consequences of this. We saw the Kentucky vote today. We saw the votes in Virginia today. There's absolutely no evidence of it. And I would argue that we've actually seen the opposite of that from Senator Mitch McConnell, who's in Kentucky, who has a feel for this state. He's been much less aggressive in defense of Trump on impeachment than Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, the Republican leaders in the House. You do not see Mitch McConnell organizing 34 senators to go out and say, hell no, absolutely no way are we ever going to remove the president from office. Instead, he's been much more circumspect in what he's doing. Today, he said if the vote were held today, there wouldn't be the votes for it. He said there's going to be a trial. He's not going to dismiss it out of hand. He's been much more, let's say, careful about it. And I think perhaps that's wise given the results we saw in Kentucky today.
Well, Mitch McConnell's re-election numbers in Kentucky are as bad as they could possibly be for a Republican. Let's listen to what Donald Trump said last night in Kentucky about that next big election in Kentucky next year.
Next November, the state needs to defend its values and vote for rock-ribbed Kentucky conservative Mitch McConnell. But we're going to get back to that later. We'll be back many times.
David Frum, maybe going back many times won't help.
No, you could also see in Donald Trump's face how little he likes Mitch McConnell, and how much less Mitch McConnell likes him. I mean, there's a calculation that every Republican has to be doing, every Republican senator, which is if a wishing fairy told you that you would keep the Senate either way, would you be happier with President Trump or without him? And I think if Republicans were sure they could keep their majority, they'd be happier without him. Yeah, and Jonathan Allen, there's another big question for Mitch McConnell and other Republicans. Let's just assume for a moment that Mitch McConnell himself, that he was not up for re-election next year. That big question is, who do they really want at the top of the ticket next year? Do they really want Donald Trump at the top of the Republican ticket next year?
I mean, the truth is, for Mitch McConnell, like any congressional leader, his priority is keeping his caucus as big as it possibly can be, keeping a majority in his case. He'll do the calculation closer to the election as to whether Donald Trump is better for that cause or Mike Pence is better for that cause. I suspect that they think that an impeachment and a removal is such a jarring consequence that it's difficult to recover from, but we'll wait and see. And David, the lesson here on trying to nationalize
the impeachment cause, trying to nationalize the defense of Donald Trump. If you wanted to run that test as a Republican and kind of fix it so that you'd get a positive result, you would take that test to a place like, say, Kentucky, which is what they did. It's not like, it's not like they took it to some swing state, or they took it to Kentucky, and they couldn't get Kentucky voters to stand up and say, yes, we are opposed to impeachment.
Look, the story of the Trump presidency is just this, that in 2012 that Republicans discovered that their classic cocktail was not palatable anymore to American voters. And so in 2016, they said, well, what if we put a little Donald Trump spicy seasoned salt around the rim of the cocktail? Does it become more palatable? And they discovered, yeah, a lot of actually more economically hard-pressed, culturally conservative white voters, especially men, will drink the cocktail with the Trump seasoning. What the Medicaid plus Trump vote shows in Kentucky is that the Trump seasoning no longer works. And the Republican message of less Medicaid for you, people are tasting that and they're not enjoying it.
Yeah, and Jonathan, what's so important about that is this is exactly what Donald Trump has tried to do. Donald Trump has spent his presidency trying to take health care away from people, trying to repeal completely Obamacare. And so the campaign run against Matt Bevin in Kentucky is the campaign you would run against Donald Trump nationally.
It's so hard to tell sometimes, Lawrence, because the president talks about how he's going to preserve various things that his government is trying to take away at the very same time. He goes out on the stump and talks about preserving Medicare, but then you look in his budget and it's undercutting Medicare. He says he's going to preserve pre-existing condition protections, and his government is suing to undermine them. You would think that that's something that the Democratic presidential candidates are going to spend a lot of time on in this primary, and eventually a nominee will spend a lot of time in the general election, much as Democratic candidates did in the midterms to great success. And Trump will have to defend what his record is.
And, David, I think the Democrats have enough video of Donald Trump saying he was going to repeal Obamacare completely that they'll be able to, I think, pretty clearly make the case that Donald Trump was trying to do, and has in many ways done, the same thing that Matt Bevin was doing.
And that video will do one more thing, and you'll see that tomorrow, which is these things get inside Donald Trump's head. I mean, the real natural politicians, the Obamas, the Clintons, the George W. Bushes, they're like boxers. They take a punch, they shake it off, they're back in the ring. Donald Trump, these things get inside his head. They work on him, and his own game begins to deteriorate as he takes on board things that more professional politicians would shake off and forget the next day.
Jonathan Allen, how long will we have to wait for the Trump tweets blaming all of this on Matt Bevin?
T-minus 30 seconds, Lawrence. How long do we have to go before the 11th hour?
Yeah, and David, that's another part of this, is that Donald Trump is now sitting in the White House tonight watching this, stewing, thinking, who does he blame? Who was the nut in his operation? Who let him go to Kentucky? All of that has to be dealt with in Trump world tomorrow.
I just glanced at Twitter a second ago. I think that's already happened. I think there's already a statement from the Trump campaign saying that Donald Trump almost successfully dragged Matt Bevin over the finish line. Yes. That is, they're heaping the blame on him. And now every Republican office holder has to think, well, wait a moment, is that going to happen to me? Are you going to kick me if I get into trouble?
David Frum, Jonathan Allen, thank you both for joining us with this live coverage on election night. Really appreciate it. That is tonight's Last Word. The 11th hour with Brian Williams starts now with continuing coverage of tonight's election night.
Tonight, great to have you with us. It is mid. For you. It's great of you to be here. Thank you for being with us. It's election night across the country tonight, off-year elections. So that means that there's elections of various shapes and sizes all over the country. Some of them are going to prove to be very, very consequential, including in the great state of Virginia tonight. Every seat in the Virginia legislature was on the ballot tonight. Every state House seat, every state Senate seat. Democrats control the statewide offices already in Virginia, but this meant that control of the legislature was on the ballot as well. Well, the Associated Press has now called it for the Democrats in the state legislature. Democrats have flipped enough seats tonight to gain control of the state House and the state Senate in Virginia. That big double flip tonight means that Democrats have control of all the statewide offices in the state. They've also got control of the state legislature in the state, and that puts Democrats in complete control of Virginia state government for the first time in 26 years. Of course, the further big news tonight is out of Kentucky, where the Democratic State Attorney General, Andy Beshear, has turfed out Republican incumbent Governor Matt Bevin. NBC News has called Andy Beshear the apparent winner in this Kentucky governor's race, which will frankly send shockwaves through not just Kentucky politics, but through national politics for a long time, given that Kentucky is a state that Donald Trump won in 2016 by, say, 30 points. Here to help us make sense of these election results tonight is MSNBC national political correspondent, the indefatigable Steve Kornacki.
All right, Rachel, well, let's begin in Kentucky. Andy Beshear, you just mentioned it, the Democrat taking out Matt Bevin, the incumbent Republican. Obviously, the backdrop here, this a big Trump state in 2016. He won it by 30 points. He was there the other night trying to get Matt Bevin across the finish line. Why did Bevin fall short? Why was Beshear able to win? There are a couple of things to talk about here, a couple of factors that went into this. Number one was just in the Democratic areas of Kentucky. There are not many Democratic areas in Kentucky, but in the Democratic areas that do exist, the turnout, the support level for Beshear was through the roof. Let me show you what I mean. Jefferson County, Louisville, city of Louisville is their biggest county in the state by far. Look at this, the margin of victory here for Beshear over Bevin in this county, 100,000, almost 100,000 vote difference here. In some context here, the last time around when Bevin got elected in 2015, the Democratic margin in this county was just 37,000. So it exploded from 37,000 up to 100,000. You saw a similar dynamic here, Fayette County. This is where Lexington is, the University of Kentucky. Again, 36,000 vote plus difference there. Beshear beating Bevin by, it was only 10,000 for the Democrat in the last gubernatorial election. So that helped for Democrats. There were other factors, though, as well. Another was, we talk about this, the suburbs. We talk about nationally, suburban areas, traditionally Republican areas that have moved towards the Democrats, moved away from Donald Trump in this era. You saw that in the suburbs of northern Kentucky, suburbs of Cincinnati. Cincinnati's just over the Ohio River, other side on the Ohio line there. But these three counties in particular in northern Kentucky, big suburban counties, about 10% of the state population in these three counties, and they swung pretty dramatically. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Boone County, yes, Matt Bevin won this. He got 56% of the vote. When he got elected governor 4 years ago, he got 66% of the vote in this county. This is the kind of county Republicans usually depend on to drive up their margins. He didn't drive it up here like he did last time, like he's supposed to do, like a Republican is supposed to do. Kenton County next door, Matt Bevin won this thing easily in 2015. Look, he lost it. He got 57% of the vote here last time around. Tonight, he lost it outright to Beshear. Same thing in Campbell County. Bevin won this thing by 10 points last time around. Tonight, he loses it by 6. So population-dense suburbs in northern Kentucky really dramatically moving away from Bevin and towards Beshear. That's the second part of the formula for Beshear. Even that, though, those two things alone, or those two things together, wouldn't have been enough. The third ingredient that got Beshear across the finish line here in Kentucky, rural eastern Kentucky. This is a part of the state that really, you talk about Kentucky, decades ago was a Democratic state. Still a lot of Democrats there in Kentucky. They're culturally conservative, and they tend to vote Republican, overwhelmingly Republican in presidential elections. This part of the state, rural eastern Kentucky, look at this. A county like Bath County. Andy is a small county, but Beshear wins this by 6 points. Look at that. Trump won it by 37. It was Republican. It was Trump by 37 points. Tonight, Democrats win it by 6 points. That's a swing of more than 40 points. And you have swings like that. A lot of these blue counties here in eastern Kentucky, it's a very similar story. So that's the third ingredient for Beshear. Rural parts of the state that are ancestrally Democratic. The folks who were there, their parents all were kind of Democrats. They inherited the Democratic registration. They kept it. They vote Republican in national levels. They went with Beshear tonight. That was an essential ingredient for him. So those are the three sort of things that went into that. Also, we'll get to the other governor's race tonight. There was a second governor's race in Mississippi. Tate Reeves, the Republican, were declaring him the apparent winner here. The reason for the hesitation, because his margin is strong there, the reason for the hesitation is Mississippi has an unusual procedure. You have to win a majority of the popular vote. You also have to win a majority of the state legislative districts. There are 122 of them in Mississippi. And frankly, we won't have the final count on that probably till tomorrow. We think, just based on the vote return pattern, that he's probably got somewhere in the 70s, well into the 70s. He'll easily hit that number. We think that'll happen, but we want to see that happen before we officially characterize him as the winner. But certainly, you just look at the vote totals there. Tate Reeves, certainly when it comes to the popular vote, the comfortable winner there. And finally, the final story, and Rachel, you mentioned this as well, the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the House of Delegates. Republicans came into the night with a narrow advantage there. There was one vacant seat. It was a Democratic seat, so really, 49. Really, it was 51-49 coming into tonight. The Associated Press says Democrats have picked up 5, a net gain of 5, the AP says, for Democrats on the House of Delegates side. That is enough to get the Democrats into control there. On the state Senate side, again, there was a vacancy, so it came into tonight 21-19, essentially. It was a Republican vacancy, so it's 21-19, essentially. And the Associated Press says the Democrats have picked up 2 seats. Their net gain of 2. They needed 1, because a 2020 tie, they would have been able to break with a lieutenant governor's vote. So the Democrats, the AP says, get the state Senate. The Democrats get the House of Delegates. The Democrats already have the governor in Virginia. They have the lieutenant governor. They have the attorney general. The Democrats have complete control of Virginia state government. And just, again, to put that in some perspective, the transformation politically of the state of Virginia, these are presidential election results in Virginia going back to 1968, basically going back a half century here. And you look at this. These are Republican margins here, right? Down through the years, we used to call this just a safe Republican state. We didn't even think about it in presidential elections, right? And it started to change. Barack Obama, somewhere between George W. Bush and then Barack Obama in 2008. Remember that? Barack Obama carried the state. Of course, he won very comfortably nationally, so that was right in line with kind of the national number. 2012, Barack Obama got reelected. 2016, Hillary Clinton carried it by 6 points, better than her national number. If you think ahead to 2020, in Virginia, remember we were talking this week about all those swing state polls, all those battleground state polls in the presidential election, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Michigan. Virginia wasn't on that list. Wasn't that long ago, Virginia would have been the first state on that list when it came to swing states. We're not even talking about Virginia as much of a swing state anymore. Used to be a red state, became a swing state, and I think now between that 2016 result and what you see here, complete control of the state government in Virginia, this is a blue state now. So I think that you can we've been talking about that evolution for a while. This might be the night that really kind of becomes official. So big picture here, look, Democrats are thrilled at what they get out of Kentucky, a narrow win, but they won the governor's race in Kentucky. Republicans will say, hey, yes, but we won solidly in Mississippi, and Democrats will come back and say, okay, how about Virginia? How about that state that used to be a Republican state now, again, completing that transformation pretty much into a blue state. So, look, there's something for everybody to sort of brag about tonight, but I think certainly the headline tonight is that the incumbent governor, you did see a governor go down in the state of Kentucky, and again, it was right after the president's visit there, so certainly all eyes were on that, but a very fascinating election night. Wish we did these more often. Anyway, Rachel Maddow will be right back after this.
All right, you think we've got it bad? Spare a thought for our cousins across the pond today.
A vital part of cooperation with our NATO allies is defending ourselves against Russian attempts to interfere with our democracy. To that end, can I ask the Secretary of State what possible reason the government can have to delay the publication of the ISC report until after the general election? What on earth do they have to hide?
What on earth do they have to hide? You know, we've got our own drama over here, but our closest overseas ally is having their own very American-seeming version of it right now, all of a sudden. For the past year and a half, the Intelligence Committee in the British Parliament, with the help of British intelligence services, they've been doing a review about Russian influence operations in the UK, the possibility of Russian interference in the Brexit referendum, where the UK surprised everybody in the world by voting to extract itself from the European Union. The intelligence report has also been looking at whether Russia, more broadly, has been penetrating and subverting British political institutions, whether Russian money has been used by the Kremlin to try to influence British politics and political outcomes. They've been working on this thing for a year and a half. They finished it. The finished report is apparently about 50 pages. The intelligence committees finished it. They put the report through whatever classification review it needed to go through. They put in the redactions that were warranted in terms of sensitive information that couldn't be shown to the public. They got that all done. And then one last step. They submitted for one last sign-off to number 10 Downing Street. So the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, could put his signature on it as a formality, and then it could be released to Parliament and ultimately to the public. That process is an official thing in the British parliamentary system. The Cabinet Office says the Prime Minister has 10 days to give something like that one last look and affix his signature, and then away it goes. But that 10-day period has come and gone now. And now the new British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says he's not going to release that report. At least he's not going to allow it to be released before the UK has their next general election on December 12th. I mean, Boris Johnson is only Prime Minister because of the political disaster that is the Brexit vote in the UK. The only reason they're having another election next month is because of the Brexit disaster in the UK. Well, here's the long-awaited report on potential foreign influence in creating the Brexit disaster in the UK in the first place. The report is done. The intelligence committee that did it wants it out. This is this nonpartisan intelligence product that's designed to let the British people know what's going on. They specifically tried to have it finished before the next election. But Boris Johnson is like, yeah, I know, but I'm just not going to allow it to be released. No, not before the voting. And so today in Parliament in London, there was an emergency debate on what the heck is going on here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and can I thank the Right Honourable and learned member for Beaconsfield for securing it and for all his efforts. I can only echo his words about the utterly unjustifiable, unprecedented and clearly politically motivated reasons for delaying publication of this report until after the election. This is not at the request of the intelligence agencies. There are no foreign powers we have to consult, which was the reason for the delay of the rendition report. This is nothing less than an attempt to suppress the truth from the public and from Parliament, and it is an affront to our democracy. So we are bound to ask, what is Downing Street so worried about? Why would they not welcome an official report into attempted Russian interference in the 2016 referendum, whether successful or otherwise? And I fear it is because they realise that this report will lead to other questions about the links between Russia and Brexit and with the current leadership of the Tory party, which risks derailing their election campaign.
So Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, is being criticised there in Parliament today in this emergency debate by a senior member of the opposition Labour Party. But he's taking criticism on this point from both Labour and Conservative MPs. The Prime Minister's office, honestly, has no explanation as to why they're not letting this report be released. Basically, all they've said is that they want more time. Under the rules, they don't get more time, but they are suppressing that report nonetheless. They're not allowing it out before the election. Now, it's interesting, watching this from over here, you see the contrast in terms of the way things run over there and the way things run here. Number one, everybody who speaks in Parliament is very articulate, and that's hard to get used to. But number two, nobody in Britain seems to believe there's any real risk of this report being leaked, either to Parliament or to the public. And if that's the case, if there's no chance that this thing could leak, this may be a done deal. Parliament had this emergency debate on the subject today, which didn't resolve the issue. At the end of that debate, Parliament closed the doors and went home. They are now due to be home and out of session until the election happens, till after the election happens on December 12th. And under the rules for how these things are handled, this report, because it's a parliamentary report, it can't be released while the Parliament is not in session. And so Prime Minister Boris Johnson appears to have submarined this thing to keep it away from the British public before they have to go vote on whether or not they want to keep him as Prime Minister. And, I mean, to be clear about what a freaking mess this is for them, this gentleman is the top advisor to Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Remember when Steve Bannon was working in the White House, and the way that Saturday Night Live portrayed Steve Bannon in the White House was that he was the Grim Reaper, and it was super terrifying? He was like... That is how Dominic Cummings is seen in Britain. But he ended up as Boris Johnson's top advisor. He ended up in the Prime Minister's office specifically because of Brexit. He was the campaign director for the Vote Leave campaign during the Brexit referendum. Vote Leave, since that referendum, has been fined and referred to the police for illegal spending in the Brexit campaign. Just this past week, police referred that case to prosecutors for potential criminal prosecution. Dominic Cummings also simultaneously has become the subject of some sort of high-level whistleblower complaint, raising concerns about his unexplained links to the Russian government and Russian interests as he was running the Brexit campaign and then becoming the top advisor to the pro-Brexit prime minister, who now won't let the Brexit Russian interference report come out before people have to vote on him. I mean, as of tonight, the prime minister's office is refusing to answer questions about that as well. No. So, take comfort, America. It's not just us. Even our closest overseas ally is living their own version of this same nightmare with even more urgency about the perversion of the next election, which for us is a year away, but for them it's less than 6 weeks away. And in the midst of everything else going on here, President Trump found time today for a one-on-one phone call with Boris Johnson. You can imagine the conversation. So tell me more about you just not allowing the Russian interference report to be released. You're just sitting on it? You're just keeping it? You're just saying people can't see it until after the election or maybe never? Tell me what that's like. Oh, and you have a whistleblower too? You're just refusing to engage on that? You think that's going to work? You got anybody who could help you figure out who the whistleblower is? You got to go after him, Boris? I mean, imagine what these two have to talk about at this point in both of their careers. Here at home today, to say the least, was not an awesome day for President Trump, either electorally in terms of what has happened tonight to Republican candidates at the polls, nor was it an ideal day in terms of his ongoing impeachment proceedings in Washington. Today, those proceedings took a sharp turn for the worse in terms of what had been the president's defense. More on that ahead. Stay with us. Now that the impeachment committees are starting to release the transcripts from the witness testimony they've already taken behind closed doors, it's starting to seem clear that they think they've got it down. They've got the basics of what happened. The core allegations at the center of the impeachment, they feel like they've got the plot. They've got all these mutually corroborating witnesses. How many more people do you need to tell you all the same story? Well, the House has requested testimony for some additional White House officials, including one that really piqued my interest today. We'll be talking about that on tomorrow's show. But as the closed-door deposition part of the impeachment proceedings broadly starts to wind down, there, of course, are two big questions that are going to determine the president's ultimate fate. One is whether the public testimony part of this may shift public opinion even more decisively against the president here, whether it may ultimately shake some of the reflexive Republican support for the president. The second factor is even more instrumental to the president's fate, which is whether Republican senators may ultimately find the behavior that has been uncovered in this impeachment inquiry could ultimately be too much relief. Obviously, it would be terrible if we had the president threatening Ukraine with cutting off military aid unless they investigated for him. Luckily, nothing like that has turned up. Well, now, of course, that is absolutely what has turned up, and what is now essentially consensus testimony from all of the witnesses whose testimony we've been able to see. And so here's the headline in the New York Times tonight. Key witness revises testimony, citing quid pro quo with Ukraine. Ambassador Gordon Sondland says he told Ukrainians aid was held up over inquiry demand. Gordon Sondland, the envoy to the EU, said he told the Ukrainians they needed to comply with investigative requests by Rudy Giuliani. Here's the Washington Post tonight. With revised testimony, Sondland ties Trump to quid pro quo. In a supplemental declaration to his earlier testimony, the ambassador to the EU said that aid was linked to the opening of an investigation that could damage 2020 presidential candidate Joe Biden. Yesterday, the impeachment committees released testimony from the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, who was fired, basically, as part of this scheme to try and get Ukraine to help Trump with his re-election effort. They also released testimony from Michael McKinley, who was a senior State Department official who quit the State Department after more than 30 years of service in protest of the way that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the administration more broadly has used and abused State Department officials like Yovanovitch, despite the fact that they've done nothing wrong and done nothing to deserve it. Well, today we got the full testimony released from another senior Trump administration official who resigned when this scandal broke out. Kurt Volker was a major Trump inaugural donor. That appears to have been how he got this ambassadorship in the first place. He'd previously testified in a way that seemed sort of positive for President Trump. He testified previously, quote, "Let me state clearly, inviting a foreign government to undertake investigations for the purpose of influencing an upcoming U.S. election would be wrong. Withholding foreign aid in order to pressure a foreign government to take such steps would be wrong. I did not and would not ever participate in such undertakings." That's what he said in the first instance. But in advance of his testimony being made public today, just yesterday, Ambassador Gordon Sondland approached the committees with a revision of his earlier statement. In contrast to that key claim by him in his earlier testimony, now he does recollect, actually, that not only did the U.S. government condition foreign aid to Ukraine on them helping the White House in the president's forthcoming re-election effort, but actually he was part of it. Yeah, Gordon Sondland absolutely admitting that, yeah, he did participate in that. He helped carry it out. I didn't mean what I said before. He told the committee in this revised testimony, quote, "I've reviewed the opening statement of Ambassador William Taylor. I've also reviewed the opening statement of Tim Morrison. These two opening statements have refreshed my recollection about certain conversations in early September 2019. The conversations described in Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Morrison's opening statements have refreshed my recollections about conversations involving the suspension of U.S. aid. Quote, I do now recall a conversation on September 1st in Warsaw with Mr. Yermak, a top aide to the Ukrainian president. Quote, this brief pull-aside conversation followed a larger meeting involving Vice President Pence and President Zelensky. Quote, after that large meeting, I now recall speaking individually with Mr. Yermak, where I said that resumption of U.S. aid would likely not occur until Ukraine provided the public anti-corruption statement that we had been discussing for many weeks. And when he says the anti-corruption statement, we know from the context here, we know in part from the huge raft of text messages that were just released by the committees today, that when Ambassador Sondland, even in his revised testimony, calls it a public anti-corruption statement, we know he was well aware that what he was demanding of the Ukrainian government was that they announce investigations that were specifically being demanded of them by Rudy Giuliani and President Trump, and they were investigations that were designed to help President Trump's domestic political considerations. I mean, here, for example, it's all, I mean, we've got it now. Here's a three-way text conversation between Gordon Sondland and Kurt Volker, the Ukraine envoy, and another Ukrainian official. The Ukrainian government at this point has sent over a draft statement they're proposing that their president could make, announcing vaguely that Ukraine will look into interference in political processes of the U.S. and a transparent and unbiased investigation. It's these sort of general statements. Kurt Volker and Gordon Sondland then intervene aggressively to say, no, 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 that's not enough. The statement has to be more specific than that. You have to include that the investigations you're launching are into Burisma, where Hunter Biden was on the board, and the 2016 U.S. elections, where we're going to claim that Ukraine interfered in the Trump-Clinton race rather than Russia having done it. I mean, their text message to the guy in the Ukrainian government literally says, following is text with insert at the end for two key items. Meaning we are making sure these named investigations that Trump wants are going to be in the Zelensky statement. I mean, they're writing the Zelensky statement for the Ukrainian government, making sure that the investigations are in there by name. And Sondland's trying to claim that he didn't know what the investigation was about? I mean, here's Gordon Sondland and Kurt Volker talking about it directly. Again, Gordon Sondland, looks like POTUS call tomorrow. I spoke directly to Zelensky and gave him a full briefing. He's got it. Kurt Volker, good. Had breakfast with Rudy this morning, teeing up a call with Yermak on Monday. Must have helped. Most important is for Zelensky to say that he will help investigation. And here's Volker and Sondland talking about it amongst themselves. Again, Gordon Sondland, hey, did you connect with Andre? Volker, not yet. We will talk with Bill and call him later today. Want to know our status on asking them to investigate. Gordon Sondland, good thought. Sondland, do we still want Zelensky to give us an unequivocal draft with 2016 and Burisma? Kurt Volker, that is the clear message so far. I mean, it's just, that's it. there it is. I mean, the political impact here is clear as day, right? I mean, the closest the president had to any sort of defense, backup, toehold in terms of explaining what he was trying to do and leveraging this other country to give him political help. I mean, it wasn't great to begin with. Sondland had already testified there definitely was a quid pro quo with Ukraine when it came to them trying to get a meeting in the White House. They couldn't get that meeting unless they announced these investigations. Sondland had already admitted that in his earlier testimony. The only place he tried to draw the line in a way that might be more helpful to Trump was on the issue of military aid. Sondland said in his earlier testimony, no, whatever we did with that meeting, there was definitely no withholding of military aid to try to get these investigations out of them. Of course not. That would be terrible. I would never be involved in something like that. Well, now, recognizing that his role in this has been exposed by many other witnesses, Ambassador Sondland's recollection has been refreshed. And now he is admitting even to that. Yes, it was a quid pro quo for the Ukraine military aid. Although I will say, even in his revised statement, it appears that Mr. Sondland is still not telling the whole truth. In his revised testimony today, Sondland is still sort of trying to be cute about his own culpability here, and maybe the president's. He says in his revised statement today, quote, with respect to the September 1st Warsaw meeting, the conversations described in Ambassador Taylor's and Mr. Morrison's opening statements have refreshed my recollection about conversations involving the suspension of U.S. aid, which have become public only days earlier. I always believed that suspending aid to Ukraine was ill-advised, although I did not know and still do not know when, why, or by whom the aid was suspended. Really? You don't know who suspended the military aid? Never heard a single thing in the course of your government service as to who had ordered the military aid suspended? Didn't have any idea where that came from or why that was being done? You sure? I mean, you just admitted that you told Ukraine why it was being done. You told Ukraine that why it was happening was because they hadn't committed to those investigations that Giuliani had asked them for. In terms of who did it and whether or not you knew who ordered the withholding of the military aid, go back to those text messages. I mean, July 18th, 2019, 10:19 a.m. Text from Bill Taylor to Gordon Sondland. OMB, the Office of Management and Budget at the White House, on a secure video teleconference just now said that all security assistance to Ukraine is frozen, per a conversation with Mulvaney and POTUS. And then Bill Taylor completes his text, over to you, Gordon, whereupon Gordon Sondland responds, all over it. So here he is notified in writing, and he responds in mid-July that per POTUS, per the President of the United States, all security assistance to Ukraine is being withheld. And even now, with revised testimony trying to say, I still don't know when, why, or by whom the aid was suspended, I mean, we've simultaneously got the evidence that shows that he knows exactly who suspended that aid. And he knew why. We know that because he told the Ukrainians why. So this guy was the best hope that President Trump had among the high-level witnesses who have testified in the impeachment inquiry. He didn't do much good for the president when he testified a couple of weeks ago, right? That, yeah, Rudy Giuliani was asking for investigations. Ukraine wasn't going to get a White House meeting unless they announced those investigations. It already wasn't good from this guy a couple of weeks ago. Now, today, any last thing he might have been able to provide the president is also gone, with him now admitting that he also personally conveyed to them that they weren't going to get their military aid or their White House meetings unless they coughed up those investigations. And he put it in writing and got specific as to which investigations they specifically had to announce, including definitely, let me spell it out for you, the one linked to Joe Biden's son. I mean, this is really bad. This feels cooked. Serving top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, testifies this was a corrupt quid pro quo. The hardline, super hawk national security guy who came in to replace Fiona Hill, as friendly as he tried to be to Trump, he also confirmed that, yes, this was a corrupt quid pro quo. Now, the serving ambassador to the EU, the guy who's not by any stretch of an imagination, because not only is there a raft of all unanimous evidence all supporting that now, even the people trying to help the president here plainly are having to admit that actually, yeah, what you just described there, Lindsey Graham, that is exactly what happened. Confronted with that reality today from this testimony that was just released from Volker and Sondland, Senator Lindsey Graham announced that he is no longer reading the transcripts of these witnesses from the impeachment proceedings. He's just refusing to hear any of this anymore. He's just done with it. And that is one way to handle your responsibilities as a United States Senator. We've got more to come here tonight. In Kentucky, Democrat Andy Beshear defeating Republican Governor Matt Bevin. Whew. We're going to be back tomorrow with more coverage, and you can bet more news. Probably none quite as surprising as all of that, but you never know. See you then. Good night.